Hey y'all, it's Mrs. Montague, and we are on our next Code.org unit, Unit 4, on variables, conditionals, and functions. So this is our first, what I call code-heavy unit. So this entire unit is about these three coding concepts of variables, conditionals, and functions. The way Code.org lays out their lessons for our code-heavy lessons are to do an explore lesson, an investigate lesson, a practice lesson, and then a make lesson. So as you can see, I scrolled through all of those for the variables. The variables explore lesson, all of the explore lessons are usually something that we do with physical manipulative type stuff in class. So when we go through these code heavy units, all I'm going to be covering are the coding bubbles that actually require us to look at code, make determinations about that code, and occasionally make modifications to the code. So we are going to skip right over the lesson 1 variables explore. We do that in class, and then we are going to go straight into lesson 2 for this video, variables investigate. So let's go ahead and jump right in. For this one, we are going to be looking at this thermostat app. So each of these bubbles has this thermostat app with some variation of it. If you are in my class, as we go through these bubbles here on code.org, you will also have your slides assignment to fill out to answer all of the questions as we go through each bubble. So the first bubble here is just a sample of this working home thermostat app. So when we run the program, all right, we can click this down arrow. All right, we see that it changes our degrees in Fahrenheit by 1 every time we click on the down arrow. And if we click on the up arrow, right, it increases our Fahrenheit temperature by 1 each time we click on the up arrow. All right, we also have a little home thing up here. Right now, though, if I click it, it doesn't do anything. Nothing else on the screen does anything. So right now, all we have working is the down arrow and the up arrow, right? So how does this app work? We put in our inputs, right? Clicking either the down arrow or the up arrow. And then the app outputs the temperature that we are setting our home thermostat to. All right, so those are our inputs and outputs. What do you guys think the variables are here? Is there more than one, or is there just one? What's being stored? What's being changed? So obviously the temperature is changing as we click the buttons. So the temperature is going to be our variable that we have here, right? Because it is being stored and changed by input from the user. Okay, so we are going to continue looking at this home thermostat app in our next bubble, bubble 2. And bubble 2 is the first place where we're going to make some modifications here. All right, so the first thing we want to do here on bubble 2 is to make a watcher for the temp variable and run the code. So we can see we have a variable for our temp, and then we have another variable called temp f. So as we look through this code, we'll look at what this temp f variable does. But first we want to go down here to the debug console, right? And then over here, all the way on the right, we have our watchers panel. And it tells us to make a watcher for temp. So I'm going to put in our temp variable. You can click the plus button or simply click enter on your keyboard. All right, and it will set the temp variable as a watcher. So as we run the app, let's go ahead and run it now. All right, we can see our initial value of our variable is 70 because we have here on line 2 a variable being created for temp, and its initial value is set to equal 70. Okay, if I go down, all right, down to 67 degrees, my temp variable in my watchers section has also changed to 67. So we can tell that it is in fact working how it should using that watcher section. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about each of these sections of code that it wants us to look at. So I'm going to make our debug console small, and I'm going to make our workspace a little bit bigger. All right, so we can go through each of these sections of code. All right, so if you are looking at section 1, lines 1 through 12, let's talk about what each line of this does. So section 1 covers our first part where we are creating our variables. So we have the variable temperature being set to 70 and the variable temp F being set to nothing, it looks like at this point. Okay. Then we have an on event for the down button. So that's going to be our down arrow over here. All right. So when we click it, it decreases our temperature by 1. So we can see it takes our current value stored in the temp variable, right, and subtracts 1 from it. So our new value being assigned to temp is going to be -1 from the current value being stored. Okay, and then our temp F variable is then set to the current value of our temp variable plus the letter F. So that's our string concatenation to add the F there. I think the reason they're doing that here is because we want to display on the screen that this is a Fahrenheit temperature, right? Not a Celsius temperature. We will, in a later version of the app on this, look at a conversion into Celsius, degrees Celsius. But right now we're just dealing with Fahrenheit. So we have that temp F to show us the Fahrenheit value. So then we get a set text. So our temperature text, which is right here, right? This is what's displaying our temperature text, is set to the value stored in temp F. Now you could make this app without this temp F variable. So my set text for my temperature text, I could just make it be what's stored currently in the temp F variable. So this could just be temp plus F, right? To make it temp Fahrenheit. But they just chose to store it as a variable. So that's what that's doing. All right, and then we also have the play sound. So when we click on that button, it makes a noise. Right, that little clicky noise. Okay, so that's lines 1 through 12. We are just creating our variables and then handling what happens to the variable and displaying the variable with our down button click. All right, so if you're looking at section 2, lines 14 through 21, let's go ahead and see what's down here. So lines 14 through 21 is for the up button. All right, and so of course the up button, we're increasing the temperature by 1 degree. So it's basically doing the same thing that happened with the down button, but instead of -1 degree, like we have here on line 8, in line 17, we are adding 1 degree, right? Because we're making the temperature go up with the up button. All right, they're doing the same thing with the temp F variable here. And then the set text is also showing that temp F value on the screen. Notice again in lines 10 and 19 how there are no quotation marks around the call to this variable for temp F. All right, so if I just want the value that's being stored in a variable to display on the screen, I don't need quotation marks around it. Okay, I'm calling a variable. That's what that's called. I'm calling that value up. All right, and it's just going to display the value that's stored in there, whether that be a number or a string or whatever it is. So you don't need quotation marks when you're referring to a variable in that way. All right, and then lastly, our up button again has the play sound. So when we click on that up button, it's making the same noise that it made when we clicked on the down button, just our button press noise. All right, and that is it. That is totally what the code is doing. So it's a pretty simple app, right? We're just increasing or decreasing the temperature. Okay, and then we do have a modification down here as well. So it says right now the temperature changes by 1 degree when the buttons are clicked. We can tell that on line 8 and line 17 when it's temp equals temp -1 or temp equals temp +1. All right, so we want to modify this code so the temperature changes by 2 degrees when the buttons are clicked. All right, so instead of temp -1 here for line 8 on our down button, we want to do minus what? 2, right? Because we want to change the temperature by 2 degrees. So every time we click the down button, it will change it by 2 degrees. And then same thing on line 17. We want it to increase by 2 degrees instead of by 1 degree. So we just change that value to a +2. All right, so let's go ahead before we move on and test it to make sure it is decreasing or increasing by our 2 degree value instead of our 1 degree value. So the down button should make it to 68, and it does. And then the up button should make it to 70, and then 72. All right, so we are increasing and decreasing by 2 now by changing the value being assigned to that variable with our math expression. All right, so once we have that modification done, we can go ahead and click on Finish. All right, and continue on to bubble number 3. Again, make sure you are clicking on that Finish to move on to the next bubble so it turns it green. Again, that makes it easier for me to grade so I can see at a glance if you've completed the whole bubble or not. So just make sure you're finishing instead of just clicking on the next bubble at the top. All right, so bubble 3 is a prediction bubble where you want to read the code and notice how it's different from the previous version. All right, so now we have our variable for temp F. Okay, so they've just taken away the regular temp variable and replaced it with temp F. So now temp F is getting a value of 70. Okay, we have a variable for temp C, so that's definitely something new. And temp C is equal to a math.round with temp F minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. All right, so that's doing some math for us, it looks like. All right, and then we have the variable temp display F. So that's our temp F plus our Fahrenheit label with the F. And then temp display C is our temp C plus the C label for the Celsius temperature. All right, so then we initially set the temperature on the screen. So it displays the temperature for Fahrenheit and the temperature for Celsius that's initially set. Then we have our down button, again, to decrease the temperature. All right, this time we are updating all 4 of these variables. Okay, again, with the temp C having that math.round. All right, and it is setting the display to display both that Fahrenheit and Celsius temperature and playing the sound as well. So really the only things that we've added in here are the lines to include that Celsius temperature. So same thing with, of course, the up button. We are increasing the temperature by 1 each time and then setting the Fahrenheit and Celsius displays. All right, so your job here is to predict how you think the math.round command works. So this line, or this block of code shows on lines 3, 15, and 28. All right, so line 3 is that first math.round that we talked about. Line 15 is the second math.round, still dealing with that temp C. And then finally on line 28 is the last math.round, again dealing with that temp C. All right, so make your prediction on how you think math.round works. I'll go ahead and put mine in. All right, so I made my prediction. I think math.round is rounding a number to the nearest whole, or let's say short decimal number, so we don't have an endless decimal number, right? Because as we know, if we're dealing with like thirds, let's say, a third of something is 33.3333333333333%. Right, so that 3 goes on forever. We don't really want to display something like that in an app like this because it's just going to look clunky, I think. All right. So I think it's rounding that number. If we had a situation where it was a 33.3 continuing on forever, it would just give us either 33 or maybe 33.3. So it's not just a continuous decimal number like that. I'm not a math person, so I don't know the exact terms for that in math, but that's my prediction. All right, so once you have your prediction in there, go ahead and submit your answer. All right, and we'll go ahead and look at bubble number 4. All right, so this time we are going to make watchers for the temp F, temp C, temp display F, and temp display C variables and run the code to see what happens. All right, so I'm going to expand our debug console just a little bit to get these watchers in here. All right, so we want temp F, temp C, temp display F, and temp display C. All right, so all of those watchers have been set here. All right, so let's go ahead and run the code to see what's going on with this one. All right, when I initially click run, our value is going to be set to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which translates to 21 degrees Celsius. All right, when I click on my down button, okay, my code is running very slow. I am going to increase it a little bit. Okay, when I click on my down button, all right, it changes my Fahrenheit temperature to 69, but it does not change my Celsius temperature. So apparently it is still rounding to 21 degrees Celsius. So let's go down another tick. All right, so now when we changed it to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, it does reduce the Celsius temperature to 20 degrees Celsius. All right, so it is going to reduce that Celsius temper eventually, as long as we reduce our Fahrenheit temperature by enough. All right, and we can see it is tracking everything correctly down here with our watchers as well. So if I increase, right, when we go back up to 69 degrees Fahrenheit, we go back up to 21 degrees Celsius, 70 and 21, and then when I get to 71 degrees Fahrenheit, that changes it to 22 degrees Celsius. All right, so it is changing both our Fahrenheit and Celsius temperature at the same time with this app. All right, so in line 3, we again have that question, how do you think math.round works? And then it says to try and delete math.round in lines 3, 15, and 28. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to get rid of that math.round. Okay, again, it's much, much easier if we switch to our text mode to do this, I think anyway, and I can just go ahead and get rid of this math.round. All right, so I got rid of it in line 3. We need to get rid of it in line 15. Backspace that math.round. All right, and we need to get rid of it in line 28. Right, this is our last math.round. We're going to go ahead and get rid of that as well. So now it's just doing the math without the rounding. All right, so we're going to switch back into block mode so you can see we just have the math. Right, we don't have that math.round command in there anymore. All right, so I'm going to reset and run it again. All right, and initially we can see the change. All right, so 70 degrees Fahrenheit actually technically is equal to 21.11111111, etc. So this is one of those never-ending decimal places I was talking about, right? It was much nicer to look at this when it just rounded it to the nearest whole number of 21 instead of seeing all of these decimal places after that initial 21. All right, when I decrease the temperature to 69 degrees Fahrenheit, then we can see it does in fact reduce the Celsius temperature, but not enough to round it down to 20. So 20.555 continuing is going to still round up to 21. So that's why it didn't change when we initially had that math.round in there, okay? All right, so we were just having math.round did exactly what I predicted that it was going to do, right? It is just rounding this to the nearest whole number so we don't have this terrible looking display, essentially. All right, so now it says go ahead and add math.round back in. All right, so I'm going to switch to text mode again to just easily do it this way. I'm going to start down here on line 28 where I already am. Okay, I'm going to click on my math.round because it shows up when I start typing it. Okay, I need to add it back to line 15. All right, math.round. And then I need to add it back into line 3 as well, math.round. All right, so now we can switch back to block mode. And we can see it has rounded. In our watchers, it's still showing us those endless decimals. But if I reset and run the program again, all right, now it starts displaying that whole number because it is rounding for us, right? The command is doing that math for us, so we don't have to do it. That's nice. All right. Now, the final thing we want to do on this bubble is to go ahead and delete the space between the quotation marks and the letter F in line 4, and then determine how that changes what displays on screen. All right. So in line 4 here, this is our variable temp display F. which equals temp F plus a space and then our F for Fahrenheit. So I'm just going to delete that space. That's what it told me to do. So there's no space between the F and the quotation mark there. All right, we're going to reset and run the app to see what changes. All right, so now when we are displaying, you can see on the app there is no space between the 70 and the F. So having that space between the quotation mark and the F is making it so it looks nice on screen, and it's giving us that little bit of a break between the temperature reading itself and then whether it's Fahrenheit or Celsius. Basically, it just makes it look nicer, right? So you want to take that into consideration as you are doing this string concatenation, which I think that we learn more about a little bit later on here. But basically, it just makes it so, like, if you're writing a sentence with string concatenation, you have, like, actual spaces where they need to be, and you have punctuation and things like that to make it actually look like a sentence on the screen instead of just, like, a bunch of things with weird spacing. Okay, that's all that's showing us. All right, and it says, again, switching to text mode might make it easier to make those changes. It sure does. All right, so I'm going to reset. We have done the modifications and looked at our questions here on bubble 4, so we should be ready to move on to bubble number 5. So let's go ahead and finish and continue on to bubble 5. All right, so these are our last 2 bubbles here. And bubble 5, we just have this home thermostat app version 3 now. All right, version 1 was the one that just showed the Fahrenheit temperature. Version 2 had the Celsius temperature added in. And now version 3 has something very new, right? We now have this login screen. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my name, Mrs. Montague, and click on login. All right, and now when I get to the app itself, we've got a little banner up here at the top that says, "Hi, Mrs. Montague," and then we still have our Fahrenheit and Celsius temperatures displaying on the screen. So this is the only thing that it looks like it is different. Okay, so what information now is being stored with this new version of the app? Hopefully your answer is the name, right? It's storing our name, so when we log in, it will display a nice little welcome message to what we put in as our name. All right, easy peasy. Let's go ahead and finish and look at this a little bit more in depth in bubble 6. All right, so in bubble 6, it says investigate the code for this new version of the thermostat app. What's changed? What's been added? Discuss with a partner, or put it on your slides if you're in my class, because you need to answer all of those questions. Sorry about that bell. All right, so let's see what has changed. First thing that I noticed that has changed, we have line 6 is a variable for username. So we have a new variable in here to store the username that you put in for yourself. Okay, so that's something new. Let's scroll down a little bit more here. All right, so our next section of code is the down button. And we can see that our temp F, temp C, temp display F, and temp C, temp display C variables are being updated, and then it is setting the text to display the temperature Fahrenheit and temperature Celsius, as well as the playing sound. So it doesn't look like anything in our down button has changed. All right, if we go down to our up button, all right, same thing. We're still setting our temperatures and setting those temperatures to display on the screen with our play sound. So nothing has changed there either. All right, but if we go down to the bottom now, all right, we do have 2 new on events. So our first on event that's new here is for our login button click. So our big green login button, can't miss it, right? So that is to click and log in once you have put in your username. So your username is being set, your username variable is being set to equal the word hi, comma, space, plus a get text from our name input. All right, so what do you think is happening in line 40? That's your first question on your slide. Okay, hover over that get text block in the toolbox to read its documentation. Okay, because that's something new we haven't seen before. All right, so get text from an element ID, right? It will get the text from the specified element. All right, so when we remember from design mode, we have this text input box, okay? And that's what this is. This name input right here is a text input box that they've added on this screen. All right, so back into our code. When I type something in to this text or this name input box, all right, this get text command is pulling whatever information I type into that box and assigning it to this variable for username. All right, so it's getting that text, it's retrieving the text. There's also one that you'll see a little later on when we are dealing with variables called get number. So if it's like number information that's being entered instead of a string or text information, you can use the get number command, and it does the exact same thing. It's just dealing with numbers instead of strings. All right, so that is what our get text does here. All right, it is just pulling that information that we input on the screen. All right, and then it is setting the text for our username text to be our username and changing our screen to the home screen. Okay, so this is the login screen. All right, when we switch to the home screen, it is setting username text right here. So it's going to display the word hi plus whatever we typed in for our username. Okay, and setting the screen to show this screen. All right, so that's what our login button does. All right, and then we do have one more button down here, which is the home button, which is here. This one that we couldn't click before up in the corner. All right, so now we should be able to click on this button and get sent back to the login screen. So I'm going to go ahead and run this program. All right, we're going to type in our name and log in. All right, and then we get to our home screen. Now I can click on this home icon this time and be taken back to the login page. All right, so those two things display on the screen what is happening from lines 39 to line 48, right, which is what is new in this program here, plus our username variable. All right, so we do have to make a modification to this app as well. It says using string concatenation, and I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's a long, complicated word. I just say concatenation. Hopefully that's correct. All right, and add an exclamation mark to the end of the string stored in username. So the following is displayed, and then it gives us the example, hi, comma, space, Lola, exclamation mark. All right, so we just need to add an exclamation mark onto the end of that string, all right, which is right here in line 40. All right, our username is being set to the value of hi, comma, space, plus our name input, right? So that's what this first part of it is. And then we need to add an exclamation mark on the end. All right, again, this is one of those things that's easier to do in text mode. So I'm going to switch to text mode. All right, we're still looking here on line 40. Okay, so we get our text, our name input, and then we need to add onto the end of this line before our semicolon at the end. We want to add some additional information onto this string, which is an exclamation mark. Okay, so I'm just doing plus and then in quotation marks an exclamation point. Okay, I don't have a space before or after the exclamation point because that is at the end of the sentence. I want it to display right after the username that I put in without any spaces. All right, so I'm just adding, right, using our math command with plus. All right, adding that exclamation mark on. All right, now I can switch back to block mode. All right, and you can see here in line 40, we have a plus sign between hi and the get text for the name input, plus our exclamation mark at the end. All right, so now when I run this program and I type in my name, if I can type. All right, when I log in, now we have the message display up here on this gray bar, hi, comma, space, Mrs. Montague, exclamation point. All right, so we have successfully added that exclamation mark using our string concatenation. All right, and that is it for Bubble 6. and it for today, except for Bubble 7, which is a short answer check for understanding question. So I'm going to leave you guys to do that one on your own. Go ahead and put in your answer for Bubble 7. If you are in my class, turn in your Google Slides with all of your questions answered there, including your warm-up and wrap-up questions. And next time we will do some variables practice. So we will have support code, and we will be making a lot more modifications and doing some of our own coding in our variables practice lesson coming up next. So I'll see you guys then.